Okay, welcome to my next feature, and we have a gentleman, Mike Nocito. Welcome to the show, and
Thank you. Good to be
you're.
here.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and people may recognise yourself from a group called Johnny Hates Jazz.
Yep, indeed.
And I wanted to commence the interview by asking my first question: Were you born into a musical family?
I actually was. My mother was a singer in a close harmony group, sort of the Beverly Sisters type thing. She was born in the 20s. So in the 40s, I think she entertained the troupe somewhat. So she did radio shows. So there was an element of music in the family. But of course, when I was born, my mother was just a mother then. So
Yeah.
she wasn't still a singer. But so I think that possibly that's what it was.
Lovely. And where did the inspiration of finding the name for Johnny H. Jazz for the band come from? And
Was that
I was just going to ask additional to that. And did the man in question, Johnny, did he actually hate jazz, whoever he was?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who sort of knows Johnny H. Jazz well has probably heard the story tons, but it's a genuine. Johnny is actually my brother-in-law, and lots of people were around at his house, my sister's house, and somebody put a Dave Brubeck record. In fact, it was Take Five. Everybody knows that famous record. And John went over and took the record off and snapped it over his knee. And somebody in the room said, "Oh, Johnny hates jazz." And I remember hearing it and thinking, "Oh, that's fun. That's kind of." And then maybe a year later, we were putting the band together, and that was just one of the names. I put that forward as a possible name. And everybody, it's a good name because it's quite controversial. The word hate
Yeah,
it's not a, in fact, back then, when we told everyone what the name was going to be, there was a guy from EMI in the States that visited the studio, and he was a big jazz fan. He was quite offended.
yeah. And
And Clark Stan, in fact, was a big jazz musician, and he didn't like the name.
yeah,
So that's quite good when
yeah.
it stokes a reaction from people.
And people also can know you by JHJ as well, in short.
That's become the more norm now.
Hmm.
Certainly, it's easier to write, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
And am I right? You were discovered at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London.
We had say 3 or 4 songs that we were. In fact, our first 3 singles, we had routine them acoustically, and we wanted to get some record companies to hear them. So we actually thought about it and thought, what would be fun to get them. Let's hire out Ronnie Scott's for the afternoon, and get the record companies to
Yeah.
come down. So they did come down, and quite a few of them, and most of them left, but one of them stayed behind till the end, and he signed us. So it
Great.
was great.
And I suppose Ronnie Scott's been a jazz club. Your band having jazz, that kind of helped you in a
That
way.
well again, that was it. Was just we thought it was fun because it's like, hey, let's go to Ronnie Scott's. We hate jazz, but let's do it at
Yeah,
Ronnie Scott's. So of course, we're actually all big jazz
yeah,
fans. To be
yeah.
honest, we love the jazz chords.
Lovely. And your debut hit, Shattered Dreams, was a massive success in Asia.
Yeah, it went all over the world.
Yeah,
So it was quite fantastic.
yeah. And when you listen to the track carefully, it has some very interesting percussive sounds on the record. What instruments did you use on Johnny H. Jazz, Shattered
Well,
Dreams?
yeah, well, there are obviously there's a big shaker in it. There's bongos, which is the solo, and we got a Frank Riccardi was the percussionist that we got in on the session, and he's a very well known percussion player. And he said, "Let me try something. Let me try something." And he went and played the bongos, and it was like that is fantastic. So the bongos are all the way
Yeah,
through it. There's congas on it.
great.
We're very influenced from all that stuff, from the soul stuff and Steely Dan and
Mm,
all of those type of records. And percussion is incredibly important.
mm.
You're not People aren't really aware of it sometimes, but to me, it's vital.
Yeah, I suppose during that time there was a lot of 80s bands who didn't use drums, so that kind of percussive sound just
Yes,
gave it that kick, didn't it?
and also, of course, these days mostly it's electronic. It's like you could just put a shaker on it, put the Lindrum, put a
Hmm.
shaker on it. But it's like no, if you're going to put a percussion instrument on, it has to be played because it has to kind of wander sort of in and out
Yeah,
of the groove. Um,
yeah.
that's the yeah.
And do you find radio DJs, they often give preference to Shattered Dreams over your other catalogue of great hits you've had?
I'm not sure that that's really true. I always, I quite often get a text from someone and say, "Hey, Kembers is playing a song," and you go, well, "Which one?" It's like, "Oh, he's playing Hero," or
Yeah,
so. But they all get played quite a lot, and that's the other remarkable thing. We're now what 30 plus years,
yeah,
35 years since, and those three still get played a
yeah,
lot all over the world.
yeah, that's good. And you mentioned I Don't Want to Be a Hero, that was number 11 in the UK charts.
Yeah,
And then you released your album Turn Back the Clock in January 1988, got to number one in the UK
yeah,
as well. Heart of Gold followed as well.
yeah.
And into, say, like the latter years, did you find yourself kind of working behind the scenes, like producing, engineering?
Well, I was all the band was created from in the studio environment. We were all musicians, Clark, me, and Calvin, but we came from a sort of the studio, so it was a natural place to go back to. I I mean, from my own perspective, I was a very keen guitar player, and I remember doing my first ever session in a proper studio in London. And I remember thinking at the time, I played my part, but I kind of wanted to hang around. I wanted to stay on, whereas, okay, I've done my bit, you can leave now. So
Yeah,
um, it's always kind of been in me. I wanted to stay. So then I got a job at RAC and became an engineer. So then I really could be there all the time,
yeah.
being the engineer.
And
Um,
did you choose to stay in the UK? Is it Cambridgeshire?
yes.
Cambridgeshire, to be precise.
Well, I grew up here, so it's kind of England is my home.
Yeah,
So I don't choose to live anywhere
yeah.
else. So
And am I right? You also played a special part in our last Eurovision victory back in 1997.
that is correct. I produced the record, the Katrina and the Waves record. Katrina and the Waves, Katrina and Vince were old school friends of mine, literally back from the 70s. And I know, and Alex and Kim, I've known the band for a long time, and they had this demo of a song, and it kind of got to a point where it was sort of accepted. It was going to be one of a bunch of songs. So they asked if I would come in, and I produced it to become the record, and then it won the nomination, and
Yeah,
then it just completely it won. It was like the biggest winner of the time
yeah. It was a
at that time.
it was a momentous occasion, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I
And
remember watching because again, I've known Eurovision obviously since I was a child because I grew up here, but I never really was that into it. And I remember watching it, thinking, "Oh, I have some skin in the game this time. I have one of the I'm involved in one of the records," and that was kind of a different experience
yeah,
too, watching it not just hoping your country wins.
yeah.
It's like, so that was, yeah, that was fun.
That's good. And to the new millennium, the 2000s, it saw you release another album with Clark. Was it
Yeah,
Magnetized?
magnetized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did that make you look at life a new perspective? Some of the lyrics kind of tell the story of like looking at life as you grow older, at a different
Well,
angle.
we Clark and I hadn't spoken for 22 years, I think it was, because the band split up. We were only around for about a year, which is again another remarkable thing that the records have stayed, still on the radio for these last 30 years. So the band were only around, and then Clark left the band, and then 20 something years later, he called me up one day, and we just sort of got together occasionally, and then after a while, we thought, well, let's try to make another album, and that's the Magnetize album.
Yeah,
So some of the songs, Clark's the main songwriter, so the lyrics are his, and I know some of them talk about, yeah, some of the regrets perhaps of leaving the
yeah.
band, and
And what experiences you have made you still create music to this very day? Last year you released a single called "The Spirit of Love."
yes,
And there was even a music video which featured pictures and videos from fans.
yeah. If that was made, if we made the record, it was our kind of tribute. Where we were big Isley Brothers fans, and so it was a kind of our tribute to the Isley Brothers in a way. Clark and I thought we didn't actually plan to make another record, and then we kind of just started doing a few things, and then we thought, well, let's make a record that we actually just want to make. It's not going to do anything in the charts because we're not a chart act anymore. So let's just do a record that we like. And that was kind of a lot of our influences were from the
Yeah.
70s. So we had we had played some shows in Tokyo and Osaka the year before last, and then lockdown happened, and
Yeah.
we had this record. So we thought, well, why don't we try to let's kind of cobble it together, and then another element can be pictures, asking fans to send in pictures and videos of themselves. You know,
Nice.
what do they think of? So it actually worked out really, really well.
And finally, you have a new single out doing the rounds. It's called Greater Good. It's on the
Yeah.
Heritage charts as well, which is
Yes.
quite prestigious charts at the moment.
Yes.
And like to tell the listener to check that your new catalogue of music out as well.
Yeah, yeah. We made an album this last year, Wide Awake, and we've had several singles already that have done very well on the Heritage chart. Greater Good is the latest one.
Yeah, well that's
It's
good.
just a very yeah, it's very. I find, of course, I would say this, but I think the album is very uplifting.
Mm.
We wanted to. It's not doom and gloom. It's very optimistic. The album.
Mm-hmm.
But it's talking about the times we're living in. So, and the greater good is, it's uplifting.
Yeah.
I find it.
So it's topical but uplifting at the same time. Makes you feel good.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Right, Mike Nocito, that concludes the interview. Thank you for reminiscing about your days in the band and bringing myself and the listener up to date to what you're doing now career-wise. It's been very interesting talking with you.
You're
Pleasure.
very welcome.
Thank you so much.